Good morning, and welcome everyone to this session around breakthrough innovation for the European Union and global recovery. The session will be particularly dedicated to the European Union Council for game-changing startups, innovators, and entrepreneurs, and the role that this genuine institutional innovation could be called upon to play in the upcoming years, both in Europe and globally. I'm Joanne Canan. I'm the co-founder of a medical technology startup here in Paris called Omini, and I am proud to have the opportunity to work with incredible innovators across Europe and beyond. In a few moments, the Director General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission, Mr. Jean-Éric Paquet, will explain to us what exactly the European Innovation Council is, but I believe that is appropriate to set the scene right now. As we know, mankind has to face a multitude of challenges that are of unprecedented complexity. The first is obviously climate change, which simply threatens our life on Earth. And I will not go into the details about the mostly pitiful human conflicts that stir in the shadow of this great threat, nor even about the formidable threat of health currently embodied by COVID-19. So in order to face all these challenges, the best weapons at mankind's disposal are the intelligence and knowledge which to this day have enabled to adapt and prosper. Now, what are science and research, if not the essence of human genius, which is based on intelligence and knowledge? However, what are science and research if they remain purely theoretical, without practical applications? And this is where the process of technological innovation comes in, from the initial discovery or idea until the market, overcoming all of the many obstacles encountered. Yet, it is in this specific area that Europe has been deficient for too long, producing a lot of knowledge, but not sufficiently transforming it into goods and services appropriated, and therefore sold on the global market. Moreover, in the current international context, the concept of European technological sovereignty has recently emerged. And this concept promotes the development and maintenance on European territory of strategic industrial value chains, in order to avoid too much dependence on external partners, which interests may significantly diverge from the European ones. We therefore unanimously feel that significantly strengthening our innovation effort has become crucial, even vital in certain areas. And this endeavor is not only aimed at improving our quality of life and the competitiveness of our economies, but also ultimately to preserve peace. Therefore, the partly predictive incentive given by the European Council in June 2018 to implement the European Innovation Council as quickly as possible. To discuss this, in addition to Mr. Jean-Éric Paquet, we invited Mr. François Petoussi, manager of the South African SME Lumkani, which has just been awarded an EIC prize for humanitarian aid, as well as Ms. Bindi Karia, expert in the field of innovation and startups and member of the EIC Advisory Board. Mr. Paquet, please, the floor is yours.
Well, John, good morning. I'm delighted to say a few words at the opening of the session here in the Paris Peace Forum, together with Bindi and François, because indeed the way Europe is looking at innovation, I think, resonates very well with the purpose of the Peace Forum. We want innovation which provides solutions to the challenges which our global society is facing. And indeed, the European Innovation Council is very much built on that premise. I think I should probably start by saying, and I think strongly noting, that Europe is in fact very strong on innovation. There's of course the perception that Europe is essentially great science, which is of course the case. The European Research Council is providing an amazing number of breakthrough support to principal investigators which are coming to Europe to do their science. Our infrastructures, our universities all promote indeed amazing scientific outcomes. And that I think is increasingly visible and well known. But we also, in fact, are very good on innovation. And across all 27 member states, industry, universities, regions have invested into ecosystems. And we don't have a Silicon Valley in Europe, this is obvious, but we have many valleys across all these member states. And we are on a yearly basis creating more startups than anyone else. And I think Station F in Paris is a good example where this is happening on a daily basis. Now, yes, it's also true that in Europe we are scaling up differently. We are not scaling up as fast as is the case in other innovation spaces. I mean, the US one, of course, particularly. But we are starting, I think, to increasingly, again, across national systems, and now with the European Innovation Council, to equip ourselves for this scaling up. I don't think it will be as fast in Europe. I don't think it needs to be as fast in Europe. What we want is to create innovators which are creating not only shareholder value, but are creating also value for society. And this is very much why we want to connect the science with the innovation, and then, of course, provide an agile set of instruments to ensure that we indeed scale up in Europe and not scale up out of Europe once the talent comes together in these startup scene. The European Innovation Council, you reminded me indeed that leaders 2 years ago called for the European Innovation Council to be established fast. The Council is part of the new program, Horizon Europe, which kicks off in January of next year, in a few weeks' time. We just had a deal in Europe on the recovery funds and on the future EU budget. So we are now all set to go. We need to put the last fine details into the program itself, but that will happen in the next few weeks. And we will, at scale, have the EIC in place next year. But we have already, in 19 and 20, piloted the European Innovation Council already at large scale. We had more than €1.5 billion available for that, so very, very significant funding. In reality, in the order of magnitude of what will be available now in the next 7 years. We created the EIC Advisory Board, where Bindi is member, and which is advising the European Commission and the teams which are running the EIC on how best to connect with science, on how best to be agile and be efficient in scaling up, on how best to combine blended finance with the EIC fund already in place and the grant component, which remains very important, advising us also on how you tap the talent in Europe, for example, women innovators or innovators across member states, which are less obviously part of that effort. And all that is in place and will allow a very, very fast ramp up as the full EIC is set up at the beginning of next year. Now, we have here a combination of bottom-up calls, where innovators across the range of deep tech innovations can come to the EIC accelerator. We also have what we call the Pathfinder, which is more science-based innovation, again, largely on a bottom-up basis. And we have had an absolutely amazing success in this year and a half, which I think is a testimony to how much talent and ideas and companies are there in Europe, including in deep tech technologies. Just to give you an indication, if you just take the projects which our evaluators in interviews and in written applications have identified as of high relevance, high quality and excellence, we have had for more than 8 billion euros worth of funding requested. So you have great innovation here out in Europe. Of course, we were not able to fund all of that. We only were able to fund a fraction of what came to us. So the success rate is very low. I mean, not very different from what you see in venture capital, where also you have these very, very many interactions and then very few funding decisions which are taken. I mean, we are getting close to that, which is probably an indication that the likelihood that we pick up really great innovators is here and there, including with the help of the advisory board. Now, that's the setup. And I think the message here is, as the European Research Council in Science essentially is Europe's Nobel Prize factory and gives the signal that science in Europe is great, I expect, I think it's already happening, but I expect down the road that the EIC will be Europe's unicorn factory, giving the signal that innovation is happening here in Europe. Come and invest in Europe, stay in Europe also to grow. We want to connect that, and I finish with that, Joanne, to be also connecting to the themes of the Peace Paris Forum. We want to connect that also with very concrete areas where we believe innovation can make a difference in society. And we also have a number of, a number of top-up calls, top-down calls, where we will ask innovators to come not on a blanket basis, but focused on providing solutions. For example, we had a Green Deal call recently where we asked innovators to come with solutions relevant for climate change, for dealing with biodiversity and the environment. Very successful. And we also decided in the context of the pandemic to ask innovators to come with solutions relevant to fight COVID-19. And we're here also amazed by how much was out there. And we have picked up 36 companies on tests, even a few on vaccines, on health tech and digital health, where we hope that the European Innovation Council, which is sometimes seen as an investment in productivity or competitiveness, it's also a key tool to ensure that research and innovation have an impact on society and on the green transition, which is still ahead of us. So that's what the EIC is in a bit more than 5 minutes, and I stop here. Thanks, Rowan.
Thank you. Could you maybe tell us just in a few words what are the EIC main roles to accompany startups and to accompany this process towards innovation?
Yeah, so the idea is that that companies apply, in particular at the scale-up phase. They apply for funding. The idea is that they can apply either for grant funding or for blended finance, which is a combination of grants and equity. We provide equity as well, and that is a unique feature, as far as I know, at least at that scale in Europe and maybe also worldwide. We believe that by providing also equity, and equity which will of course be carried in a very neutral way, we are not in there to make a profit. On the contrary, we believe that this equity will help companies as they start to go through, if you want, the science part of their development, which the grant funding is critical for. And as the science part progresses, the risk, of course, for additional investors diminishes. And the equity, we hope, will also allow the company to tap into markets. The EIC fund, which is set up at the outset, is not deciding on the investment. The investment is decided by the European Innovation Council, with the advisory board, which advises us, but by the council itself. The fund then does the due diligence, and also from the outset, and as we progress, will then be tasked to find additional investors, of course, always in agreement with the team in that company. So that's essentially how it operates. This, as I said, is highly competitive, but I think innovators are used to that and probably want that as well. What happens is that you come forward with your idea. There's a relatively simple written application to be prepared, and we hope with Bindi to make this even easier in the future as we move forward in Horizon Europe. We are looking at YouTube-type pitches in the first stage. That would be quite revolutionary for a public institution. So relatively light first stage, then of course a selection, and then an interview phase. So we are not just doing it on paper. We are also, like VC firms, meeting the teams. And it's quite interesting to see that between written applications and the interview phase, there are sometimes quite big differences, where you will find that a great application is not necessarily reflecting the quality of the team. And conversely, sometimes the team has been struggling to prepare its written application, but you then find super talented, energetic, visionary people, and they then also get selected. So a very interesting two-step process, which we try to have in a very compressed timeline, again, to be in line as much as we can with the VC type culture. And this has been piloted at scale in the last 2 years. We'll improve it a bit further as we move into the fully fledged European Innovation Council next year, but it's already there, up and running. And the ticket, the order of magnitude is 2, 3, 4 million euros. It can be more where that is justified and relevant, and that at the stage where companies come to us is of course a key investment, which usually, or at least on average, in this pilot phase already, leverages 3 times more of additional investment. So it is really making a difference.
Great. So thank you very much, Mr. Paquet, for this quite impressive work. And this actually suggests that Europe has already taken the challenge of innovation head on. I would just like to remind our audience that if you have any questions to any of our speakers, you can post them in the chat, and please indicate who the question is addressed to, and we will be taking the questions at the end of the session. So moving on, we would love to see the concrete results of all these efforts. And some of these endeavors were already initiated previously during the pilot phase of the EIC, and in particular through the EIC Horizon prizes, which aim to trigger innovations in areas where societal problems need to be addressed. And these prizes call for breakthrough innovations that can demonstrate both feasibility and potential, so that innovators can take them quickly to the market and reach those in need. So among these prizes, the EIC Horizon Prize for Affordable High-Tech for Humanitarian Aid was launched in November 2017, and the finalists have been recently announced in June 2020. And 5 exceptional innovations that can make a big difference in the lives of the most vulnerable people have won this prize. So this rewards the best proven and cost-effective technology-based solution for humanitarian aid in 5 categories, which are related to shelter and related assistance, water, hygiene and sanitation, energy, health and medical care, and an open category. So the winners, which were 1 per category, have received 1 million euros each. And the winning innovation in the first category, which was shelter and related assistance, is LHP, which has been developed by the South African SME Lumkani. And as far as I know, it's a low-cost solution, providing community-wide alerts for fires in neighborhoods as slums or as refugee camps. Mr. Francois Petousi, which is the representative of Lumkani in Johannesburg, will be telling us more right now about this breakthrough innovation. So please, Francois.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in the Paris Peace Forum 2020. It's an incredible honor for myself and our organization to have this space to discuss. And obviously in these difficult times, we really believe that it's so important to shed a light on the sort of innovations that are tackling the major challenges occurring in the world today, and looking at how we can contribute to building a more peaceful and safer world as a whole. And obviously we can't be tackling all of the world's problems in the short term, but we really believe, and we've seen in our own organization, that there's a lot of potential to alleviate many of the things that are plaguing the most vulnerable communities in the world today. So let me start firstly by introducing myself and my company. My name is Francois Petousi, as you said. I'm the Director of Humanitarian Projects at Lumkani. And I'm here in South Africa, where we're based. Lumkani exists to mitigate the loss of life and property associated with informal settlement fires in South Africa and around the world. And for anybody living in a developing nation, I think people will be very familiar with this major challenge of fires in high-density urban informal settlements and in refugee camps, where in the worst cases, a single fire can take tens of thousands of homes in a single night. And this obviously has an incredible socioeconomic impact, leaving people who are already incredibly vulnerable in these devastating cycles of poverty. And so we set out to tackle this challenge many years ago. And what we developed initially was a piece of innovative technology, a networked early warning fire detection system, which creates a community-wide call to action as soon as a fire starts, giving people the necessary time to limit the spread of a fire before it becomes dangerous. And we've been rolling out the system for many years. At the moment, it's in over 40,000 homes around South Africa. And we also have sizable projects in Kenya and in Bangladesh. And we work with local NGOs and international aid organizations and different corporates to reach all these high fire risk households. And yeah, it's amazing to see today, with like 5 years of data of the system effectively working, the sort of impact that it can create. In 94% of fire events that are recorded on our system, communities report that the Lumkani system helps to limit the spread of fire. Yesterday on my phone, I had 2 different fires, one from Kenya, one from locally here in Cape Town, that were limited from spreading beyond the first home, minor damage inside of these areas. And these sorts of stories are coming to us constantly. And so we're very heartened and inspired to continue to grow the impact that we create. And one of the ways that we did it is we went beyond technological innovation. We looked at other ways in which we could contribute to the challenge, as well as ways to build a more sustainable organization. And we developed an affordable way for people to insure their home against fire, specifically in this informal home context. It was a first of its kind product. We partnered with a local organization called Halad, one of the largest private insurers in South Africa. And we distributed this product now that allows people to actually cover themselves, self-protect, without having to wait for humanitarian assistance to deal with this challenge of fire. And we have about 3,000 customers at the moment in South Africa. It's a growing product that we've been building. And we have agent networks that essentially come from these high fire risk communities and distribute this product as well as a fire detection system into these areas. And these are the two major ways in which we tackle this challenge, this devastating challenge of slum fires, using an innovative IoT technology to reduce risk. And at the same time, the technology allows for deeper financial inclusion, where people have access to an affordable way to cover their homes against fire. And we see these two systems, I guess, working together to create quite a formidable force in building a lasting and sustainable change in this context of building resilience in informal communities. And obviously, as you said, we were awarded the EIC prize a couple of months ago, which was, again, an incredible honor and has really changed a lot for our company. On a direct level, obviously, we have the funding to grow, and we're going to be rolling out to another 30,000 high fire risk homes in South Africa in the next year, which is incredible. And beyond that, I guess we have opportunities like this to speak on a global stage and share the work that we're doing. And as a direct goal, I guess, in the future, with the sort of funding that we have available, we're planning on expanding across South Africa, as well as then going beyond our borders, besides for the projects we already have, moving into other developing nations where there's a great need for the work that we do. And yeah, we've just launched an equity funding round as well to try and raise capital so that we could really speed up the process and reach our impact and business goals a lot faster. And this is obviously a great opportunity to share that with the broader community at large. So thank you.
Congratulations on the award and on rolling out. Can you maybe tell us just in a few words, how can you build a business model in social impact? Because as you're raising funds, you will have to convince investors. So how do you distinguish between becoming an NGO or a company and building a sustainable business model?
Sure. I mean, I think it's definitely an innovative and I think necessitously inclusive process. You have to work with the people that you're hoping to serve. I think that's one of the critical things in building a sustainable and appropriate business model. Because I think the social context of building a socially impactful business requires you to be incredibly context-driven, to know not just what people need, but as well as what they want in daily life. So I think the ability to build innovative social business models definitely comes from being incredibly close to the communities or the context that you want to serve. And yes, retaining both a very strong financial outlook and ensuring that you develop sustainable models that actually can result in very profitable businesses, but within the context, I think, eternally of what is your primary purpose and goal and how do you achieve it. And I think some of the innovations that we've undertaken in terms of, for example, introducing our financial inclusive products of our fire insurance products is good examples of how maintaining a strong vision and combining that with scalable business financials, there really are great ways to, I think, in the long run, build more sustainable models to create social change and impact at scale.
Great. So thank you. And I think what innovation can provide for humanitarian situations in many poor countries. And it is obvious that we need more of these breakthrough innovations on the global market. So I guess this is why the EIC has been struggling to make it happen under the guidance of the group of advisors of the EIC. And one of them is here with us today, Bindi Karia. So Bindi is London-based. She's an innovation expert, advisor, connector across the whole ecosystem, and a venture partner with Draper Esprit. So welcome, Bindi.
Thanks, Joanne. First of all, I wanted to say it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to take part in today's Paris Peace Forum. And I really wanted to thank the organizers for hosting this session and for their commitment to lasting peace and security. I think in a world that's changed immensely, particularly in the last 9 months, we really need to be flexible. We need to be agile, adaptable, And we need to continuously evolve and progress. And we need to innovate, much like we do as entrepreneurs and investors. So I think the EIC remains ambitious in its goals to support European innovators. And what the purpose is to help these innovators remain ambitious in their visions for impactful and sustainable innovations and technologies, and including those that can support the European recovery going forward. The team of advisors, we all come from the private sector, so we're founders, we're investors, we're ecosystem leaders, we're influencers, and we as a team of advisors, as well as the EIC team at the EU, really appreciate the emergency we're facing globally, and we're constantly developing ways to speed up and refine support. So Mr. Paquet did talk a bit about, for example, the call on COVID technologies. And it's really wonderful to see how agile the EIC can be to respond in real time to challenges that are facing us as a continent immediately. And because innovation and support for innovative companies, it's required for immediate and lasting success. And I think that's one of the best things about being an advisor and one of the best things about what I do day to day. And actually, this is where the EIC comes in. We support breakthrough innovation companies, we support startups, we support entrepreneurs with a European and global impact. And it's actually a distinctively European approach to support relevant innovations, being responsible and inclusive. And it's also embracing European values and ethical standards. And in my view, it's a real partnership between the public and private sectors.
Great. So thank you for joining us today for the discussion. And maybe to kick off the next part of our session, which is a few questions that we've already prepared. You've mentioned that the EIC wants to promote a responsible and inclusive way to embrace European values and ethical standards. So can you maybe expand a bit more on this and give us examples of how this can work in practice?
Is this for Bindi, John?
For Bindi first, and if you have something to add, of course, Mr. Paquet, please don't hesitate.
Can you repeat that? I thought this was for Mr. Paquet.
Sorry, no. So you've both talked about how the EIC wants to be more responsible and inclusive, and in charge of taking European values in. So could you maybe expand a bit more on this point? How can we be more inclusive, and what are the European values we stand for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just being inclusive and diverse, I think, first of all, let's talk about the makeup of the EIC advisory board. It's 50% male, 50% female. And it, to me, it was very deliberate that we started by being as inclusive as possible on the board. And it's really also funding about different parts of the ecosystem. So innovation companies, startups, entrepreneurs, and really looking at areas that don't discriminate against background, education, race, class, gender. I mean, you just have to look at me. I'm a minority female working in the tech ecosystem. And, you know, if you have a great idea that can have a strong positive impact, the EIC wants to hear from you and support you. And also due to the nature, the open nature of the EIC funding program, visionaries from any sector, and we've seen so many different pitches from energy, AI, sustainability, medtech, biotech. Anyone from any of these areas can apply, meaning funding somehow can be directed according to what society needs at the moment. So we saw this with the COVID call, as I mentioned earlier, and in March this year is when that happened. And I know we got thousands of applications to this COVID call, resulting in a lot of amazing work and insight being built up by what is happening even just from March onwards. It's also focused on startups and SMEs with a focus on impact, as we see with our colleague on the panel. And, you know, appreciating that companies need patient capital in order to develop their innovation. It's not just necessarily about making an immediate return, but it's long-term patient capital to make sure that these startups can create an impact and bring it to market, and really not expecting that fast return on equity investments, which you would typically see from the private sector and private sector investors. So in a way, it's a really good partnership to allow these companies to get to a stage to be funded longer term. And then the EIC can provide up to 15 million in equity funding. But it also encourages companies to take their time in the development of their innovation and supporting them doing so. It's required to bring the breakthrough innovation to market, and the EIC fund will support the company to attract further investment with similar terms and conditions. And we're beginning to see that. We're beginning to see companies that were in the pilot, they're now starting to raise, different levels of financing, so maybe a Series A onwards. And I'm seeing the EIC and the mentoring program really beginning to support this group of founders as they reach out to the private sector. I think the final comment I'd make, and one that's really closest to my heart, is making progress in supporting and increasing its support for female innovators and entrepreneurs. And I think that's a key European priority. I know Mr. Paquet can certainly attest to the veracity of how we speak up for female founders in all of our meetings. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Paquet, do you have anything to add about inclusivity and European values?
Yes, I mean, firstly, I want to echo what Bindi said. We are very, very keen to ensure, obviously we are looking at companies which can make a real impact. I think the real, identity of the European Innovation Council is that we are focusing on deep tech innovation. And that is innovation which in many cases will need patient capital, as Bindi said, because the step taken to approach us and request support from the EIC, these companies in most cases are still developing the science. And there is not much venture capital, with exceptions of course, but there is not much venture capital which is investing there, including because this is not easy to assess the science behind some of these projects. And the EIC is from that point of view, of course, particularly well positioned because we benefit as we set up the evaluation process from science expertise across our own science system around our research program. So we are really able to assess the science, and then we combine that expertise, that scientific expertise, with participation of financiers, of colleagues which know the innovation ecosystem like Bindi. And so our evaluation panels really can cut through the science, but also through the innovation potential of the teams which are behind the project. So that's really a big dimension of the EIC, which I think should be underlined here. And that's all the more relevant that for climate solutions in batteries, in solar, in wind, this is not just about deploying digital solutions where the idea with some funding can get you at scale quite rapidly. It's much more than that. You need engineering, you need science that is costly, that is risky, and this is where the EIC makes a difference. Now, on the inclusivity dimension, this is obviously extremely important for the Commission, for Commissioner Gabriel, but also for our President and Margaret Vestager. All of these women are involved in the EIC. And drive an extremely ambitious gender balance agenda, which of course we are supporting fully. And Bindi and the advisory board of the EIC came up with a number of rather smart approaches to ensure that, of course, we only take up what matters and what has impact, but we have found ways, in particular in the pre-selection, to ensure that we have the highest number of female-led companies going to the second stage. And then, of course, the quality will be the main factor, but we have found ways to really promote that. And I think this is now getting known, because if you look at the last call, which just closed, we have nearly 30% of companies which came to request funding, which are led by female entrepreneurs. And that's really an interesting development, which I hope will continue into the future. Another important dimension of values, I think, is in digital AI deep tech, where Europe is, of course, working in the context of data privacy and the General Data Protection Regulation. That's, I think, an illustration of where regulation promotes values as well. When the GDPR was adopted and came into force a few years ago, this was perceived as an impediment, an obstacle to innovation in Europe. I mean, I would argue that, I mean, we are, of course, I think now driving the debate on privacy in digital globally, on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think there are also a number of examples, for example, in the health sector, where the existence of that European regulation is triggering blockchain innovations to ensure that you can make health and patient data available on a large scale, sometimes at national level, as is the case in Estonia, for example, whilst fully protecting the privacy and identity of the patients. It can be done, and it generates also innovation. So this is where we would argue that our values are part of our innovation path.
Thank you. And could you maybe tell us in a few words, how does the EIC plan on deploying under Horizon Europe? And more specifically, do you have any specific goals to create new unicorns in Europe?
Well, I think we are still contemplating, and Bindi, maybe you will tell us what the advisory board would recommend in terms of benchmarks. I think it would be an interesting idea to have benchmarks also on unicorns as we move forward. So I mean, maybe in a nutshell, so we will now move into the fully fledged European Innovation Council, and of course, the big difference between the pilot phase and Horizon Europe is that the legislation is different. We were operating under the past rules when the EIC was not yet existing, and we were, I think, quite agile here also to make good use of that legal framework. But in Horizon Europe, we have much more space to create a European Innovation Council, which will take a number of features also from other actors across the globe. We have looked very carefully at ARPA-E and DARPA, and what we will import from these, I mean, of course, historic agencies in innovation policy is notably the concept of program managers. We already have a few which were hired. We will have more as we set up the EIC next year. And their role will be, as is the case in DARPA, to do a portfolio management, and if you want to connect the two components of the European Innovation Council. As I said, we have the Pathfinder, which is really promoting real science. This is not yet scaling up. This is not yet a market-driven innovation. This is disruptive science, not science in labs, but science with a more specific application towards development down the road. And this Pathfinder, which is a historic instrument, it's not completely new, but we will fund it, of course, on a greater scale in the EIC. We hope will in scientific teams generate potential for deep tech innovation down the road. And we will have these program managers, which will connect the Pathfinder with the accelerator, which we described already, this grant and blended finance capacity to help innovators scale up. So that's one important dimension. Another one is that we hope that the European Innovation Council can also be, in Europe, one platform, maybe the platform, but let's say one platform, to connect the actors of Europe's innovation ecosystems. I said at the outset that at regional, industry, university level, we have hundreds of small ecosystems which have proven to be highly impactful in generating ideas and allowing startups to emerge. And I think what this creates is, of course, great diversity, but also probably a need for trying to come together, align it where necessary, but with the particular focus on giving the innovator the message that she or he is not confined to its initial ecosystem, but is working across the internal market in Europe. And that, I think, is going to be one of the dimensions of this ecosystem effort of the EIC, including, of course, also by then connecting some rather powerful national instruments or programs. The EIC is the European level, but in countries like Germany or in Finland, also in France, as you know well, Joanne, there's more and more effort also at scaling up innovation successfully. And I think it makes a lot of sense to ensure that what is done at national level can then be enhanced where possible also by the European instruments. So that's another dimension of the work on ecosystems. And then what we also hope to do is between EU instruments to be much more relevant. because the EIC is, of course, the new kid on the block with, we hope, a massive impact. I mean, we are speaking of 10 billion euros over the next 7 years, so 1.5 billion every year, of which at least 3 billion would be for equity. And that's at the outset. We hope to crowd in other public investors into the EIC fund. So that's just the starting price tag, if you want. So quite significant. But then the EIC needs to be combined also with a number of other financing opportunities. We have the European Investment Bank, the European, the EIF, the European Fund. We, of course, also have InvestEU, which is another EU budget mechanism which guarantees some of the operations of the EIB, allowing it to take more risk. I think it makes a lot of sense that the EIC fund is the entry point, maybe a one-stop shop, which then would also help the companies where equity is held by the EIC fund to grow by connecting them to these other instruments. And then, of course, there are large-scale other instruments at EU level, the Institute for Technology with the knowledge and innovation communities, but even the European Research Council and the proof of concept, which is one of the instruments today already available. When you are a principal investigator in the European Research Council, at the end of your project, if you believe that your science breakthroughs could go to the market, the European Research Council can make available a proof of concept supplementary funding. I think it's 500,000 to allow the scientific team to prepare a path to innovation. And we want to connect these various elements of the ecosystem. So that's another development which is in preparation, which I think will make the European Innovation Council very, very impactful. All this is, of course, done with the advisory board, and the advisory board is more than just a board. The advisory board is really where these ideas are emerging. Bindi and many others. We have Hermann Hauser, which I think is quite known in the venture capital scene in Europe and beyond. Jim Snabber, who is the CEO. We also have Mark Ferguson, which is leading the board right now and also leading Innovation Ireland. I mean, these are people which know how innovation works on the ground, which can connect science and innovation. So this is not run by bureaucrats in Brussels. Of course, we are supporting it. We are providing the funding. The legislation originates, of course, with policy choices made by the European Commission. But then the energy, the ideas, the breakthroughs in the way you support innovation will come from that that European Innovation Council Advisory Board. And that, I think, will make a real difference. Here again, there's inspiration drawn from, not so much from DARPA, but from the European Research Council, where the scientific council of the European Research Council is really driving the success of the European Research Council. They find the scientists ready to come for evaluations. They push breakthrough science. And of course, then the European bureaucracy is operating it, and we are quite good at that. But it's this combination which is frankly pretty unique and which I think will make the EIC a great agency, a great program making a difference. And again, we will combine bottom-up with top-down guided calls so that we can see and harness the potential of innovation to create solutions for our challenges.
Well, as a founder, I can only thank all of you for the efforts you've been doing to help us move on. Since we are early stage, we're going to need a lot of help, and EIC is really a great initiative. So, Francois, we've spoken a bit about unicorns. Do you see, or does Lumkani have the ambition of becoming a unicorn? And do you see any contradiction between this kind of becoming a unicorn, very successful business, and developing affordable high tech, which is for humanitarian aid?
It's a great question. I think we definitely don't see any contradiction between those two things. The whole design of a healthy social organization, which is what we've been trying to build, the social company, is that it's a win-win both for our shareholders and for the people who'd be benefiting from our services. There's very much a context inside of how we design the model behind our business, is that as we scale up the business as a whole, so we'd be scaling up our impact as well in a direct way. And I think being a socially focused organization, if we were to ever reach being a unicorn, I think that would be a phenomenal beacon for other organizations, other people who are trying to achieve similar things, of the opportunities of simultaneously creating like a significant social impact and well-being in the world in the context of like sustainable growing organizations. So that's very much our ambition. I mean, obviously on a more reasonable level, we have like direct goals to scale up around Africa and other continents in the world, and the need is only growing. The reality is that with the reality of world population growth as well as urbanization, projected at like by 2030 there could be as many as 3 billion people living in inadequate or informal housing. And that in our world means that the scale of the challenge that we're specifically trying to deal with, building resilience in these informal settlements, is something that will only continue to grow. So the need to scale up as fast as possible and the ability to tackle this challenge in a very timeliest way is actually really important. And so we are looking for the sort of capital. I mentioned obviously the equity capital round that we're trying to raise right now, but as well in like any other context, so that we can reach that sort of scale as quickly as possible and create the sort of impact that's really needed in this sector. So to answer your question, yes, we would definitely find the alignment between creating affordable high tech for a humanitarian context and growing to a unicorn level company would be, obviously a great success for us.
Thank you. And we have a question from our audience to you, Francois. How is the lack of access to internet and phones addressed in your work? And is it critical to your current undertakings?
Sure, that's a great question. I think in a lot of contexts, what we've been trying to design is something for a community and context that does have a lack of access to the internet, networks, all of those coverage. And we've designed a system that can essentially scale across different networks on a technological level. We don't rely on a single network to be in coverage in order for our system to function. We built a system where we simultaneously are sending text messages out to users as well as ringing on the ground inside of people's homes with our fire detectors. So that way there's so many levels of fallback to ensure that as soon as the fire starts, we are simultaneously creating different layers of alerts that aren't reliant on the same sort of technology or infrastructure. And that's especially important, I think, as we move into other countries and contexts and areas that we've been researching and looking to grow into. We can really see that what the coverage and cell phone opportunities in depending on the context obviously differs a lot. And so we've developed a system that is very robust to those different environments, that can function with or without cell phones and network coverage, as well as whether or not users and people who are benefiting from our system actually have access to that technology. So we've been very much conscious of the sort of limitations and challenges at play. And as much as it's obviously a greater benefit as people's access to this would grow, there's no limitation on our ability to actually tackle this challenge in the interim where people don't have as much access to those sorts of technologies.
Great, thank you very much. And Bindi, I think through your career, you have worked with a lot of stakeholders, whether it's startups, investors, corporate, and governments. Did you see any shifts, especially recently with the COVID events, and their focus points and, let's say, in the whole ecosystem? Have you been seeing any changes?
When you say shifts, do you mean in technology, or could you be a little bit more specific?
Whether in the focus, maybe especially as a startup, I would be interested in the shifts in, let's say, investment focuses, whether it's from governments or private investors, especially due to COVID-19 crisis, for instance. Currently, we see much more focus on maybe social impact or sustainable technology, which was maybe not the case a few years ago.
Yeah, I think basically one of the biggest shifts I've seen, it's really around the world of work and the future of work. And given we're going to be increasingly a remote workforce, I think that's one thing that we've seen in terms of technologies. CB Insights wrote a really wonderful piece on the 24 technologies that are going to be impacting the post-COVID world. And we saw the usual things like future of work. We're looking at a lot of advances in health tech and biotech, obviously. The great news about the vaccine and obviously the European connection to that. I'm seeing things, for example, advances in AI, for example, conversational AI, which is really focused on customer service. E-commerce continues to go to the next level. Yeah, I do see a lot of different technologies, moving to the next level. I think the other shift I've seen is, and if I sort of can go back to Mr. Paquet's comments earlier about the EIC, I've seen government bodies becoming much more agile in how they deal with this sector. So as you mentioned earlier, the green call or the COVID call, and that was done very quickly, pretty much overnight, which is unheard of from a government body. And I think the other shift I've seen from a collaboration perspective is, again, if I may go to the EIC advisory hat, in terms of the willingness to listen from both sides. So for example, the advisory board, we really talked a lot about think more like a VC. As a government body, you have this money, you're able to deploy it, but as you deploy it, think more like a VC. Think about returns. Think about the questions you ask these founders. Think more like a business person. And I've seen, the embracing of that concept. I've seen a much more of a shift to diversity and inclusion. It's still pretty bad in terms of female founders getting funded in the private venture sector. And if you look at, I've got some numbers here in front of me from EIC, where it used to be about less than 8% back when the accelerator started. And now 25% of the SMEs invited to interviews are women. And that is really down, again, to that collaboration between public and private. And I also think there's a shift in thinking, and this is kind of boring, but real, is the thinking of admin. And, every single entrepreneur, and I can see Francois smiling away, the forms you have to fill in when applying for grants like the EIC. And we're really pushing them to say, think more about the kind of productivity tools you can use and make it easy for the founders and the investors to collaborate with the government. So I am seeing a shift in how we communicate with each other. And I think we all spoke 4 different languages, even 18 months ago. And now, because of COVID and the way we are as a world, we're much more focused and much more forced to speak with each other and understand each other, even if we're in 2D. I mean, I personally can't wait to see everybody in human again and in person. But the fact that we're in different cities around the world and we can actually have the discussion and have people globally watching us, I think, to me, this is just what the future is going to be.
And maybe talking about female entrepreneurship, it's great that we're trying to fund more female-founded companies, but how can we push more women to take the leap and found more companies? What actions can be taken?
Oh gosh, I think we've got to start very young. I think we have to start encouraging our girls in school and, show them that entrepreneurship is a career path. And I know there's a lot of programs here in the UK, so things like DigiGirl, or a lot of the big corporates. I haven't really mentioned about corporates, but a lot of corporates have programs where they're reaching out to schoolgirls and saying, you can have a career in tech. And then I also think it's important that women like myself and, other women that are more senior females in the industry are encouraging and really being role models and bringing people up the ladder with us. I think that's also very important, and encourage women to take that leap of faith. There's a long way to go, I'm not going to lie, but I still think it is so much better now in November 2020 than it was even 1 year ago in November 2019. And there's so much more focus on it. So I think it's an encouragement. It's bringing them up the pipeline from a very young age, encourage more women to study the STEM and science, and encourage more women in entrepreneurship. And actually, there's another gap, is when women do become founders and get to seed and Series A, making that leap to Series B and to growth stage. There's so few female founders in that category. So I think that's the next big area that both governments and private investors really need to focus on, is really helping female founders get to that scale-up stage through the growth and bring more female unicorns. We need more women unicorns.
I hear you very well.
Thank you, Joanne.
Mr. Paquet, we have 2 minutes for one last question from our audience. What are the micro grants available to help startups quickly create and add value to niche areas like circular economy? Really 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, the micro grants are available essentially at a national level in national ecosystems. we don't do micro grants in the European Innovation Council. We are focusing on where we add value to the national system. So that's where I think the support should be. And I think the point on circular economy is a very, very good one. The circular economy is not only about regulation. Of course, we need regulation to help actors move in more circular ways of working. We need standards as well. This cannot just be done in the economy and in society. But equally, it is very, very visible already today that there are many great ideas in recycling, in repair, where innovators will make a real difference in making the circular economy a reality. And we are available at scaling up level. We have seen circular economy relevant companies already supported in the EIC European Innovation Council Accelerator. And I very much hope that member states will continue to invest at regional industry and university level into these microcredits so that you can then develop and come to us when you're ready. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And since we have an extra minute, you've mentioned that the maturity stage, which is expected for EIC, is scale-ups. Are there any actions taken for startups which have recently started? And we get a minute for this question.
If it's still for me, Joan, I think indeed the startup support is largely at local or national level. We are not equipped to deal with the thousands and thousands of great teams across Europe, and this is where you need to look at Europe in terms of a system. The system needs the various levels. The system is not a completely homogeneous system. Obviously, there are overlaps as well between local or national systems and EU level support schemes. But essentially, the idea is that the ground funding, the very early seed funding, is done in national systems, and we then, with national systems, interact to ensure that scaling up can happen, starting maybe at regional and national level, but then with the EIC being available to help these companies go through the deep tech science research phase where relevant, and that is where we focus the EIC on. Grant funding being then very significant, several millions of euros, with equity which can be up to 15, as Bindi said earlier on, and then also remain available for further rounds of financing or facilitating these rounds of financing. So that's the complementarity, if you want, between the European EIC system and what is happening at national level. I mean, there are, of course, nuances because the landscape is always complex. The knowledge and innovation communities of the Institute for Technology sometimes indeed link into the national systems, and they probably can be looked at as well at an earlier stage, but the seed financing really is at national and local level.
Great. So with this, we've reached the end of our session. I would like to thank you, Mr. Paquet, Bindi, and François for joining us and for all these exchanges. Breakthrough innovation for the European Union and global recovery. And I would like to wish you all and our audience a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye. Bye.